thank you for joining us this evening, Riley. This is our 4 Phases of Retirement program. Just before Riley gets started, I'll do a little introduction. So Dr. Riley Moynes is a successful author with several bestsellers to his credit. Foremost among them was the groundbreaking financial planning guide entitled The Money Coach. He's also a popular public speaker. Following a successful 20-year career as an educator, he turned his talents to the financial services sector. He was an early recipient of the Dalbar Financial Professional Seal as one of the country's most trusted financial advisors. Now retired from active involvement in the investment business, he concentrates his efforts on writing reader-friendly publications on topics of public interest and presenting workshops across the country. One of his recent publications, The 4 Phases of Retirement: What to Expect When You're Retiring, became a Canadian bestseller within a year of its release. His 2022 TED Talk, based on the best-selling book, was viewed by over 3.5 million people in just 11 months. So Riley, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Alicia. Thank you, and thank you, folks, for joining us this evening. I hope that you'll feel that it's time well spent over the next half an hour or so. Our topic is the 4 phases of retirement, and we're going to talk about how you too can squeeze all the juice out of retirement. Everyone says you have to get ready to retire financially, and of course you do, but what they don't tell you is that you also have to get ready psychologically. Who knew? But it's important, as you'll see in the next little while. That's our focus today. It's the psychological changes and challenges that almost always accompany retirement, but that there has been really, as I say, very little discussion about until fairly recently. Let's start with a little bit of background, and some of this information I'm sure you're very much familiar with, but the first baby boomers, those folks born between 1946 and 1965, hit retirement age of 65 in 2011, just a little over 10 years ago. Today, about half of the boomers, almost half of the boomers, have reached age 65, and the last boomer will turn 65 about 7 years from now in 2020. Did you know that 10,000 North Americans retired today? And they will tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and every day for the next 7 years. Think about that, 10,000 retirees a day. It's fair to call that, I think, a retirement tsunami. At the same time, life expectancy continues to grow. Back in 1950, which for some of us perhaps may not seem that long ago, average life expectancy in Canada was 68 years. We could therefore anticipate about 3 years of retirement, which may help to account for the couple in the top right corner of the slide here who are doddering their way towards their rocking chair to live out their allotted 3 years of retirement. Well, things have changed clearly, as you can see, and by 2000, average life expectancy had risen to 76, thus on average 11 years of retirement, and it's continued to grow since then. 2010, 81 years, 16 in retirement, and the most recent figures available show us life expectancy in Canada at 82 years, about 17 years of retirement. But it's fair to say, as you'll see, that many of us who are here this evening can probably expect to live up to 1/3 of our lives, quite likely close to 30 years in retirement. That's mind-boggling, and what a huge change from 1950, when instead of a potential 30-year retirement, we were looking at a 3-year retirement. At the same time, interesting to know, fastest growing age group in North America today is the 85 plus gang. And the second fastest growing group is the 100 plus folks. We are indeed an aging society. So here's some further proof, if we need it, that We need to plan for a longer retirement than even the statistics might suggest. A couple of years ago, Prudential Life Insurance Company set up in a park in Austin, Texas. And they began to put this big board up, and it was about 10 feet high and about 50 or 60 feet long. And as you can see, they've marked it off with different ages, and they've conveniently shown us the retirement age there vertically 65, 70, and 80, and 90, and so on. And as people began to kind of gather around wondering what was going on, they distributed about 400 circular discs about the size of a frisbee. And they asked people to place those frisbees on the board to represent the age of the oldest living person that they know. And look what happened. If average life expectancy is, let's call it in round figures, 85, look where the majority of those discs have been placed. They're far to the right of that, representing ages 90, 100, and even up to 110. So we're clearly living longer than ever before, up to 1/3 of our lives in retirement. And so the question is, how do we spend that time productively and meaningfully? That's what we want to talk about this evening. Now, my mom reached 100 a couple of years ago, age 100. And this is a picture of she and I at her 100th birthday. And I said to her, I said, you know, Mom, I've read about a lot of people turning 100, but you're really the only person I know who has reached that pinnacle at this point. And I said, what impact has that had on you? And she kind of thought for a moment, and she looked at me and says, well, this is what it looks like. I thought she looked pretty good at 100. She made it past 101, and she made it to within 2 months of her 102nd birthday before she passed away. Let me tell you a brief story about how I got interested in this whole topic. I belong to a walking group, and we meet early 3 mornings a week. And our primary goal, of course, is to put 10,000 steps on our Fitbits. But then we like to go for coffee and, even more importantly, cinnamon buns early in the morning. During our walks, we've got in the habit of having conversation, choosing various topics for discussion during our walks. And one day, the question asked for discussion was, how can you squeeze all the juice out of retirement? How's that for a question at 7 o'clock in the morning? So we walked and we talked and we discussed that topic. And the next day we moved on to another topic. But you know what? It stayed with me. The question stayed with me because I was retired at the time and I was busy enough. But to tell you the truth, I really didn't think that I was doing very much that was kind of meaningful or significant to me. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what success looked like in a working career. But when it came to retirement, it was fuzzier for me. So what I did was to look at the written material that was available at the time. This is a few years ago now. And what I discovered was that most of the material related to retirement focused on investments and estate plans. And do we have a will? And do we have our powers of attorney in place? And do we have the appropriate amount of insurance? All of that stuff critically important, of course, but just not what I was looking for. So I decided that I was going to talk to people who were retired and who had been identified by other people as having kind of retirement figured out. So I approached these people, and then, of course, I was referred to many others as well. And I had a series of questions that I asked them, close to 9 or 10 questions. And I always finished up by asking the question, how do you squeeze all the juice out of retirement? So this process took me almost 3 years to complete. And as you can imagine, when I interviewed well over 100, closer to 150 retirees, I had a lot of information, a lot of data that I was trying then to figure it out. And what I discovered was good news. I discovered that there is a framework and there is a pattern that can help make sense of it all if we know what we're looking for. And that's what I want to share with you today, this evening, is that framework that I hope will help make some sense of it all for you. But let's begin here with a little exercise. On the screen, you can see the 99 game. And as you probably figured out, on this sheet are numbers from 1 to 99. So what I'm going to ask you to do in the next couple of minutes is to, and we need to do this mentally, just as you can see it on the screen, but I want you to identify number 1 and kind of mentally circle that. And then I'd like you to look for number 2 and mentally circle that, and number 3 and number 4 and so on. And I'd like you to go as high as you can go in chronological order from 1 to 99. Let's see how far we can identify those numbers in the next 30 seconds. Ready? Go. Okay, pens down, as old Alec used to say. Now, during a live workshop, of course, I can see you and you can see me. And so I'll ask the question, hands up, all those who got to 99, from 1 to 99. Everyone usually laughs. Not one person puts their hand up. And I say, okay, well then what about who got up to number 50? No hands. 40, no hands. 30, no hands. 25, no hands usually. And then I'll say, well, you know, the purpose of the game exercise is not to create undue embarrassment, so we're not going to go any further. But I'd like to give you a little bit of help if I can. So I'm going to suggest that what you do is this. I'd like you to mentally divide the page up there, as I have done on the screen, into 4 more or less equal quadrants. And let me point out to you, if I can as well, that number 1 is in the top right-hand quadrant. Number 2 is in the top left-hand quadrant. Number 3 is in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And number 4 is in the bottom right-hand quadrant, and so on, and so on. And so now I'm going to ask you to do this. With this newfound powerful information, I'd like you to pick up where you left off last time at number 5 or 6 or whatever it was. And I'd like you to see how much further we can get in the next 30 seconds. Go. Okay. So at this point, I ask, how many people got further the second time than we did the first time? And almost everyone raises their hand. Almost everyone got further the second time than the first time. And so I ask, well, how do you account for that? And I hear things like, well, there was a framework, or we had a plan, or we knew what we were looking for, all of which, of course, are absolutely correct. If we have a pattern or a framework within which we can put some information, it tends to make more sense. And that's what I want to try to provide for you this evening, is a framework that can help make more sense of some of the challenges that you either have already faced in retirement or will face in retirement. And if you're not yet retired, I hope this will be a kind of a heads up for you so that you can know what to expect when that time comes. So when we're finished with our brief time together here this evening, you're going to know what the 4 phases of retirement are. And if you're retired, you will know which phase you're in now. If you're not, you'll know what to expect when that time comes. But before we begin, I want to just point out, make 2 important assumptions before we carry on. The first assumption is that we're assuming that you are enjoying relative financial stability. Second assumption, that you are enjoying relative medical or health stability. I understand entirely that lacking either of these 2 assumptions, retirement can and does look very different from what we're going to describe. But with those 2 assumptions, let's press on and talk about the 4 phases of retirement. Phase 1, vacation phase. That's exactly what it's like. People approach this phase of retirement. They have worked hard for years outside the home or inside the home. And the time has come now where you have kind of retired. You can step back a little bit, and it's just like being on vacation. One of the things that you like most about vacation, of course, is that you can do what you want, when you want. You can go to bed when you want, get up when you want, do what you want all day. You love having no set routine for the time being because your life has been dominated by routine. It kind of irked you at times that you had this routine that you had to stick to. And one of the beautiful things about vacation is that for that period of time, those routines are simply not in play. It's a time for many people when they can finally address some of the bucket list activities that they had dreamed about for years and years. Maybe they've got it sort of in their mind. Maybe they've actually written a list. But one of the big things that we find in phase 1, travel, is a huge thing for phase 1 retirees. Everybody, it seems, in phase 1 is either traveling or they're planning the next trip, or they've just come back from a last trip. We find in phase 1 that there are lots of new golf clubs being bought and commitments made to improving a golf game or a pickleball game. And there are new sailboats being purchased, and there are new cars being bought, sports cars often. We find lots of activity in phase 1 where people are buying warm weather properties so that they can get away from the nasty winter weather that we experience from time to time. It's that kind of thing. It's vacation. It typically lasts for about a year to 2 years. For me, it was just about dead on 2 years. And for most people, this phase 1, represents their view of an ideal retirement. That's what all of the television advertisements, all of the glossy magazines are advertising: freedom, relaxing, fun in the sun. We're walking along the beach. It's all about freedom. And we love it, and we have worked hard for it, and it's all about us for that period of time. Nothing wrong with that. Pardon me. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But it's interesting. After about a year or 2, we actually get a bit bored. Over and over and over again, people told me about that. And that was my experience. Because, for a time, we enjoy not having our routine. But I'm convinced that there is something almost instilled in us, almost genetic in us, that requires a routine over a year or so. Over and over again, people told me they missed their routine and they were bored, and they had been told that this is what retirement was all about. And now we're bored and we're missing our routine. So people are asking, is that all there is to retirement? And when they ask that question, I know that they have moved into phase 2. And they start talking about retirement as a plunge into the abyss of insignificance. And maybe that's a bit over the top, but it's a phrase that I've read to describe retirement. And whether that may be just a little bit extreme, okay, maybe so, but it is well documented that retirement is one of life's top 10 traumas. There's no question about that. It's right up there with divorce, with the loss of a spouse, with moving, with a new job. These are all among life's top 10 traumas, and retirement is right up there. So now we're in phase two. In phase two, it's a time when we feel loss and we feel lost, because most people will suffer 5 significant and virtually unavoidable losses in phase two. We lose our structure. Now, again, we sometimes felt that our structure or our routine was constraining to us and we didn't like it, but something in our genes needs a structure or routine, and we've lost that when we retire. We've lost our identity because males in particular, more so than women, but not exclusively, identify with their job or with their calling or what it is that they're committed to. They identify with that. It's important to them. It's part of their being. And when that is taken away from them, we lose a part of ourselves. And it's a significant loss, and it's a painful loss for many people. We lose our relationships. In many cases, relationships that we had outside the home at work become long-term friendships. And when we retire, they're gone. And you know as well as I, if you're retired, that you can go back and have coffee with the guys or the gals every now and then, but it doesn't take you long to realize when you do that, that those folks are still in it. You're an outsider and you feel that way, and there's something that's been lost. Those relationships have been lost, and you probably don't go back and have coffee with the guys or the gals very often. We lose a sense of purpose. Many people get a sense of purpose out of their calling. And when that's gone, that's a significant loss as well. And finally, some people lose a sense of power. It may be that during their working careers, they have risen in the ranks to the point where they have some responsibility for a budget or for some personnel. But when you retire and you walk out the door, you're just a guy or a gal in the street. Now, we don't see these losses coming, and we lose them all at the same time. And the result is that it's just like poof, gone. And it is traumatic for many, many people. 5 significant losses in phase two. And it gets worse. Because in phase two also, we are at greater risk for the 3 Ds. Depression. Did you know that the world famous Mayo Clinic has reported that when you retire, there is a 40% likelihood that you will demonstrate aspects of clinical depression? True. Decline. Physical. That silky smooth golf swing that we used to own isn't quite so silky smooth anymore, is it? And then there's mental decline. Like, where did I put my keys? Where's my cell phone? Where? All of these things, you know what I'm talking about. And the 3rd D, surprising to many people, divorce. In North America, divorces among people over 50 have doubled. And for those over 65, the rate has tripled since 1990. Shocking statistics. Piled on top of the 5 losses are the 3 Ds. And did you know what the highest rate of suicide in Canada is today? Men over 75. Yeah. So the result of all this, the 5 significant losses and the 3 Ds, a person can feel like they've been hit by a bus, because it's true. Before we can look forward to some of the positive aspects of phases 3 and 4, you are going to experience fear, uncertainty, and anxiety. That's just the way it is. All the research reinforces it. My interviews reinforce it, and my personal experience reinforces it. So I urge you, in phase 2, buckle up, because it's going to be a rocky ride, a rocky time for you. But fortunately, sooner or later, we say to ourselves or a significant other, hey, I just can't go on like this. I don't want to go on like this. I don't want to spend the rest of my life, perhaps 30 years or so, feeling like this. And when we say that or feel that, that's a good sign, because that's when the rehab can begin. That's when we know that we have moved into phase 3. Phase 3 is the trial and error phase. Phase 3 is when we say to ourselves, hey, what can I do to make my life meaningful and productive again? How can I still contribute? What can I do that's going to allow me to squeeze all the juice out of retirement again? That's good that we're asking those questions, because it marks a turnaround. But it's important to understand that phase 3 is trial and error. It's trial and failure. And it's unlikely that the first bright idea that you come up with as to how you can make your life meaningful and productive again will be the one that works for you. There's a very good likelihood that there will be several false starts, several failures along the way. And certainly I experienced a number of those, just 3 of which I want to share with you briefly this evening. I spent several years working as a volunteer on a condo board. I can hear you laughing. And I did that until I finally got tired of being yelled at. You see, one year, in our infinite wisdom, our condo board decided that rather than planting daisies on our lovely property, that we were going to plant daffodils instead. You got it. We got yelled at. Yeah. I thought about law school. I was always interested in law school, and I thought about, I'd like to go to law school. But then I realized that, that's a long haul, and there are a number of years involved, and it just was maybe more than I wanted to bite off at that time. So then I looked at becoming a paralegal and thought, that kind of might be interesting, same idea. And then I realized that I didn't really want to spend a lot of time in small claims court fighting over traffic tickets. But I did, as part of that course, I found some things on alternate dispute resolution that I really was interested in. And I took a number of programs at the University of Windsor on dispute resolution, alternate dispute resolution, mediation programs. And I had high hopes for doing something productive in that area. But you know what? It all went nowhere. It just went nowhere. I like to write. And so in many of my interviews, I talk to people and they express an interest in, maybe I'll write memoirs. I'll write my memoirs when I'm retired. And I thought, that's, maybe I could help out there. So I developed a program called Getting Started on Your Memoirs. I guess I can best describe that program as so far having enjoyed limited success. Yeah. It's been a rocky road for me too in phase 3. And I did tell you to buckle up, because phase 3 can be a tough time as well. Not everyone breaks through and reaches phase 4. Phase 4 is the time when we reinvent and we rewire. Not everyone breaks through and reaches phase 4. I have seen some people, a very small number, who have remained in phase 1. It's all about them. They say they're happy just taking care of themselves and doing exactly what they want to do. And I have no reason to doubt that. It's just that there are relatively few people in my research who have felt that way. Most people move on from phase 1 after a couple of years. And we've described phase 2. Some people are just unable to break through phase 2, and they become part of the statistics that we cited previously. Most people are able to break through from phase 2 and into phase 3, and when they try a number of things, and in some cases they're successful, and that's great, and they do move on to phase 4. But I've also seen some folks who just keep trying and trying and trying in phase 3. Nothing seems to work. They get discouraged and they drift back into phase 2 and again become part of the unfortunate statistics that we talked about. So it's true that not everyone breaks through and reaches phase 4. I calculate, based on my work, that only about 60% of retirees actually reach phase 4. But what I can tell you is that those who do are some of the happiest people I have ever known. These people just vibrate with excitement, with enthusiasm, with all the things that they're involved with. They can't wait for the alarm to go off in the morning. They just can't wait to get up out of bed and get at it, because they've got so many things going on that they find meaningful and productive. And it's wonderful to see that enthusiasm that comes from the phase 4 folks. But it's important to realize that it's not for everyone, and not everyone gets there, because what's required, I've discovered, to get to phase 4 requires answering some pretty intense questions. We're not particularly good at introspection, it seems, but we need to ask ourselves questions like, hey, what's the mission here? What's my purpose? Why am I here? What can I do to squeeze all the juice out of retirement? And here's what I've discovered. Over and over and over again, it almost always involves providing service to others. Maybe on a volunteer basis, maybe on a being paid for basis, doesn't matter. You can provide service to others in a number of different ways. But if there's one thing that underlies people who have reached phase 4, I'm going to say it's this: it almost always involves service to others. Winston Churchill had it right, as he did on so many things. He said, we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. And that's really the essence that I find in phase 4, folks. So I want to share with you, folks, 4 tools that you can use if you decide that you'd like to get to phase 4. And I hope you will, because phase 4 is the best phase. It's the most gratifying. It just provides the best sense of well-being and accomplishment that you can achieve in my research. It absolutely is. So here's the first tool. It's important that you know what your unique ability is. So if we start at the outside rim here, as you can see, there are a large number of things in the light circle outside, a large number of things at which I am completely incompetent. And I suspect that the same is true for you. As we move a little closer to the center, there is a smaller number of things that I do competently, and I suspect that you do competently as well. For example, if required and under pressure, I can deliver a reasonably good barbecued hamburger. I'm competent at that. Do I love it? No, but I can do it if I have to. Closer to the center, there are some things that I do very well, a smaller number of things that I do very well, and I suspect the same is true for you. And in the middle, there is what I call unique ability. And unique ability is comprised of the thing or things that you love to do and that you know darn well you do superbly. That's what unique ability is. So in our live workshops, I take some time and I ask people to make note of, to write down under unique ability, what is it that you love to do? And what is it that you know darn well you do really well? And I'd ask you to consider doing that yourself. We won't have time this evening, but at the right time, decide what it is that is your unique ability, things that you love to do and that you do very well. It's important if you want to get to phase 4. You have to know yourself. You have to ask these tough questions. Second tool, in our live workshops, we take some time and I ask people to make a list of just 5 successes, victories, highlights, breakthroughs that they have experienced so far in their lives. We often overlook these things. We don't take time to kind of give ourselves credit for some of the accomplishments that we have achieved. And so again, I would ask you to consider taking time when we're finished here this evening or at some time that's convenient to you. Identify some of the high points of your life. You could probably list 50 of them, but just do 5 and you'll see what power it can bring. 5 successes, highlights, breakthroughs, victories. It's important that we know what these things are that we've got in our arsenal because we're going to use them to get to phase 4. Thirdly, we need to look for common threads. And what I ask people to do in our workshops is to put the page that they have written their unique ability on the left side, and then to put on the right side the page that they have been working on that indicates their 5 highlights. And I'm always interested in this because I find over and over again, people don't get the connection, but there is one. Because isn't it logical that things that you do very well and that you love to do would have led to success in the past? And they do over and over again. So I ask people to just draw a line between the things you love to do and past successes. There's a connection there that many people often overlook. But again, it's important to give yourself time to be sure that you know what the things are that you love to do and do well and have led to success in the past, because they're going to help you get to phase 4. Finally, I'm going to ask you to identify and find your sweet spot, the place that is just the best place for you to be. So looking at the chart here, at 12 o'clock, what you love, and at 9 o'clock, what you are good at, that's your unique ability, right? Those are the things we need to know. Now at 3 o'clock, we need to give some consideration to what can I do that the world needs? What kind of service can I provide that the world needs? We don't have time to consider all the things the world needs. That list is endless. So almost anything that you decide that you'd like to do is probably going to meet a need that's out there. And finally, interestingly, at 6 o'clock, have a look here, what you can be paid for. And when we're talking about providing service for others, in some cases, you will be paid for it. No problem. But maybe you're not getting paid for it, at least in the traditional financial way. Maybe you're just getting a great feeling, a feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of having made a difference. That's the sort of thing that you might be getting out of it. So I'm suggesting that at the point where these 4 circles overlap, where that small spot there in the middle, where there's overlap of the 4, that's your sweet spot. That's what you were meant to be doing. That's where you want to spend as much time as you can in retirement, because you will get huge satisfaction out of doing so. That's what you need to do. So take some time, unique ability, 5 victories that you've achieved. Look for the overlap and look at where they coincide, and that's where you want to devote your time and energy. Interesting study done by Harvard Business School a few years ago. This was a 20-year longitudinal study that involved 15,000 retirees. And they went back to these retirees every 5 years over a 20-year period. And they asked them different questions at different times, of course, about their experience in retirement. And it's one of the largest, most productive retirement surveys ever completed. And it was a huge report, as you can imagine, being from Harvard Business School. But one of the things that stood out for me, and I think might stand out for you, is this quote: "The unhappiest retirees had not gone on to do anything productive beyond pleasing themselves." Unhappiest retirees have not gone on to do anything productive beyond pleasing themselves. That, ladies and gentlemen, is phase 1 behavior, where it's all about me, and that's fine for a period of time, a short period of time. But you can't build a productive, successful, gratifying, meaningful retirement on that attitude. You have to get beyond that, and you have to be doing things for others. Service to others is the underlying key. I think you'd agree that most of us need to find activities that we find meaningful, that give us a sense of purpose. It's pretty simple to put our own little, as Steve Jobs eloquently put it a few years ago, our own little dent in the universe. And it's true that we're probably not going to put as big a dent in the universe as Steve did, but we can put our own little dent in the universe. Maybe it's by supporting a charity that you believe in. Maybe it's by delivering pizzas. One of the guys that I interviewed gets great joy out of spending a couple of days a week, 2 or 3 hours a day, or an evening sometimes, delivering hot, fresh, delicious pizzas to people who are hungry and are looking forward to his arrival. He makes great connections with these people, and they with him. He gets a great sense of satisfaction out of providing this kind of service. Another lady that I spoke to and interviewed, she delivers prescriptions for her local drugstore in the area that she lives. And you can imagine the satisfaction that she gets in delivering prescriptions to the homes of people who can't get out of their homes to get those needed prescriptions. It's very gratifying for her. And she earns a little bit of money for it, but it's really about the satisfaction that she gets. Maybe you're going to write a book. Maybe you're going to write your memoirs. Or maybe you'll do something like my friend Tim. Tim has owned 3 electric vehicles, 3 Teslas, and he has put together a program where he visits Rotary clubs, Probus clubs, church groups, school groups, as you can see here. And he has a little presentation that he makes about electric vehicles. And many people didn't realize that electric vehicle technology has been around for over 100 years. But it has, and he provides a really interesting discussion. And then in some cases, weather permitting, and in this case, as you can see, he takes the kids out into the parking lot, and he's got one of those Teslas where if you fiddle with your phone, and all of a sudden the Tesla moves from the parking lot on its own and parks in front of Tim. Well, that creates an impression, as you can see. And even here, he's got the hood raised of the Tesla. And although these kids are pretty small, most of them have a pretty good idea that under the hood, there's supposed to be a motor. There's supposed to be an engine there. And of course, there isn't in the Tesla. So that's one option. That's something that he enjoys. He does many of these a year, gets great satisfaction out of it entirely on a volunteer basis. Gives him great interaction. He loves it. Or maybe some of you would be better as old coots. Yeah, this one usually gets a pretty big laugh, but you know, it's a true story and it's a great story. This is a group that currently is doing this in Salt Lake City, Utah. And what happened is that in the past, they had met in the store of the fella who's in the left-hand corner. He owns a deli, and the gang, the old coots as they call themselves, used to go to the deli. Well, they still do. They go Saturday mornings at about 10 o'clock, and they drink coffee and they eat bagels and they solve many of the world's problems. And the fellow next to him, to his left, back there in the white t-shirt and the dark hat, he owns a kitchen cabinet making business. The lady to his left is a journalist at a local newspaper in Salt Lake City. The fellow, not the next fellow in the black, I'll come back to him, but to his left, there's another fellow who he's talking to somebody in the next booth. I'm not quite sure what he did, but the fellow here on the right in the red t-shirt, he was a teacher. And it was he who decided and informed the other old coots one day that, you know, among them, they have tremendous experience and expertise, and that he felt that they had a duty to share that experience and expertise with the world. So he decided that they were going to set up a booth in the local farmers market. That's what they've done here. And they're going to give advice. It would probably be bad advice, but it's free. Now, coming back to the fella at the back there in the black shirt and the sunglasses, he is not an old coot. No, he hasn't qualified to be an old coot as yet, either by wisdom or by age. But he's hoping that when the time comes, he will have met the criteria and he'll be accepted into the old coot family. Now, things started slowly for the old coots when they were giving advice. One of their first visitors was a 10-year-old kid who wanted help with his math homework on his tablet. That threw some of them off, but they did the best they could. Then there was a lady who wanted advice as to how she could prevent her cat from peeing on her living room rug. Yeah, started slowly, but now, according to the fellow in the red t-shirt, they are the most popular booth at the fair, at the farmers market. And that's proven by the fact that they now, are you ready for this? They now have their own weekly podcast. Old Coots Giving Advice. It's available on all of the podcast platforms that you might use. So you can listen to the old coots. Here's something that I did a couple of years ago that I got great enjoyment out of. This was just before the pandemic. I was part of a water mission that went to Honduras. And our mission over a 5-day period was to repair 8 previously drilled wells, which had over time stopped working. There was no provision for replacement parts or for ongoing maintenance at that time. Many of these wells had been drilled by the Japanese government as a humanitarian gesture back in the 80s. And they worked for a while until they didn't. And in some of the villages that we visited, it had been so long since these wells operated that most people in the village didn't even know that they existed. It was only some of the older folks who knew. They were in areas that had been overgrown and had been completely forgotten about. So my role here in the front, as you can see, is I'm preparing the plastic pipes that are going to replace the old rusted iron things that my colleagues in the background are taking out of the ground from the well. And it takes only about 4 hours to replace a well if all goes well. And in most cases it did. We were able to repair 7 of the 8 wells that we were assigned. The 8th one was simply required equipment that was bigger and stronger than we had with us. It was subsequently repaired a month or so later. But in doing so, we were able to repair these 7 wells, and in so doing, provide clean drinking water to over 2,200 men, women, and children in these impoverished villages in Honduras. We were also able to provide hygiene training to 300 or more moms and children, just basic how to wash your hands kinds of things. It was one of the most gratifying experiences of my life. At the end of it all, after our 4 hours or so, we've got a new well. It's functioning. Even these little kids in the front can operate the well. And in many situations, it's the first time in their lives that they would have access to clean drinking water. What a way to contribute. What a wonderful sense of gratitude and productivity came as a result of that. So I work with Water Ambassadors Canada, and the motto is that contaminated water is the world's biggest cause of death and disease, the world's biggest cause, and it's the easiest to fix. It doesn't require multi-million-dollar machines to operate. It doesn't require new medical breakthroughs. It doesn't require any of that. It simply requires providing clean drinking water. Maybe you'd like to become involved with Water Ambassadors Canada. We're sending mission teams again after a 2 or 3 year hiatus through the pandemic. Wonderful, wonderful experience if you're up for that. That's a kind of a not once in a lifetime, perhaps, but once every now and then. But here's something else that I found that I really enjoy. Every Friday morning from 8 a.m. until noon, I visit our local hospital, and I am a member of the welcome team. And we help people find where it is that they're looking to go. I've discovered that there are 3 groups of people who come into the hospital. There are those like me who have got the little lanyard that you see there, and they don't need my help because they're either staff or volunteers. Then there's a second group of folks who move very quickly. They know exactly where they're going. They don't need my help. But it's the third group who come to the hospital, and I know darn well that no one comes to the hospital for fun. So when they come in, they're under stress, quite likely. They've got some concerns, and our job is to help them not only tell them where it is that they're looking to go, but when we can, to take them, and they appreciate it so much. So it's true, I believe that anytime you use your gifts and abilities to help others, you are fulfilling your calling. No question about it. So remember, you're not alone in this transition, folks. 10,000 North Americans are retiring every day. And we've got more options to consider than ever before, and longer to do it than ever before in recorded human history. So we have a marvelous opportunity to combine our passions and our strengths to make the world a better place. And that leads me to the final story I'd like to share with you about my friend Bill. Bill spent 40 years inflicting pain. He was a dentist. But you can tell by the image that Bill is not a pain-inflicting kind of a guy, and he indeed is not. But he believed that in our community, there is a tremendous range of expertise and experience. And he believed that if you ask people to volunteer to share the things that they love to do and do very well with others, they would agree to do so. And so he did. And in the first year, we had 9 people who volunteered their services to teach painting or to teach mahjong or bridge. One even fella gave us a bicycle repair program. And in the first year, we had, as I say, 9 programs, and there were 200 people involved. The next year, it grew to 45 programs with 700 people involved. And the following year, over 90 programs. And they're printed on the glossy brochure that Bill is holding. Over 2,100 registrations because of one person's idea and a belief that people, if asked, would volunteer their services. Remember in phase 2, we talked about the 5 losses: the loss of structure, identity, relationships, purpose, and power. The magic of phase 4, folks, is that when you get to phase 4, all 5 of those losses are regained and they are enhanced Bill has a new structure for his life. He's no longer inflicting pain. He's got a new identity as the guy who makes things happen. He's created new relationships when he asks people to volunteer their services. He's got a new sense of purpose in his life. And although he couldn't care less about power, he's made good things happen in our community. So to wrap it all up, you now know the 4 phases of retirement. If you are retired, you know what phase you're in. If you're not, you know what to expect when the time comes. So final suggestion, don't retire, at least in the traditional sense of that term. Instead, I urge you to take the things that you love to do and do well, build on past successes, and look for ways that you can provide service to others. So it's not, don't retire, it's rewire. Take those strengths, apply them in an entirely new situation, and provide value for people who will experience, or at least who will appreciate it tremendously. So everyone says you have to get ready to retire financially, and of course you do. What they don't tell you is that you have to get ready psychologically. So I urge you, enjoy your vacation in phase 1. It won't last for long. Be prepared for the losses that are bound to come in phase 2. Experiment and try many options, as many as you can in phase 3, until you find that right thing for you, and squeeze all the juice out of retirement in phase 4. Thanks, folks. Thanks for attending. Ready for questions if you have.
All right, thank you so much, Riley. That was great. So we are coming up on 8 o'clock now. So if anyone needs to head out, that's totally fine. If anyone does have some questions, we can take a little bit more time, if that's okay with Riley.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, anybody have any questions? I'm just scanning the participants here. You can put your hands up, you can unmute yourself. Janet, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you so much for a very inspiring and wonderful presentation. Some of it resonates with me, and it's actually very exciting.
Thank you.
So briefly, I retired from my professional career in 2019, 2 years earlier than I first had planned, but it was my choice and I was embracing it very, very well. I happened to have landed a couple of contracts with the 2 organizations that I was already doing volunteer work with. They received some grant money, and they had asked me if I would take on a specific project with an initiative they were doing. That was great. One was finishing, another one was starting. So that brings me fast forward what was supposed to be a few months to just a month ago, 2.5 years later. Well, I guess, yeah. And I was working, I was doing great. I loved what I was doing. I really did. And it was really just an extension off, it was sort of a different branch off the same tree of what I had been doing professionally.
Right.
But I had decided that after many, many hours, countless hours of contemplation, that I wanted to give up my paid work. I was still doing a little bit with 2 organizations, but I was going to give up the bulk of my paid work with the one. And here I am a month later, and I'm kind of now, well, I call it re-retiring. I re-retired, and it's completely different than the first time. It's the craziest thing. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of like, I'm not in stage 2, but I think I'm kind of in stage 3.
Okay.
Because it's now all of a sudden, how do I rewire everything?
Yep.
How do I take all those hours? I was paid for 10 and probably did 20 a week, plus volunteer work embedded in some of that. I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Even though I'm still doing stuff, it's still a lot of hours of the day. And so now I'm in that experimental reevaluation stage. I understand what I'm good at. So it's really interesting, but you sparked a couple of ideas for me and things and places I can now reach out to, because and stretch what I was doing before off yet another branch off the tree, and do it more as a volunteer, because the world's a different place now than it was during COVID, which was the bulk of when I was doing my paid work.
Yeah.
My husband has now mostly retired. So it's almost like a whole new chapter starting all over again. So when I say I'm re-retiring, I really am.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've been able to avoid phase two almost completely, which is wonderful because it's certainly the most challenging of the phases, and that you're kind of, as you say, back to phase three, trying to figure out what's next. That's great.
Because I think phase 4 came to me right away
Mm,
the first time.
yeah.
Um, I had about a week or a few days of phase 2 of that. Maybe I shouldn't have given up that paid work. Now
Yeah.
what do I do?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
felt lost. I felt empty.
Yeah.
But I think it's just taking time to now hone in on that which I can do and pursue, and to spread my wings in a
Yeah.
different way now, because I don't want to be fully obligated all the time. And I don't want to do something and then have to think about it when I start, before I start and after I finish, because that's what I was doing before.
Right.
And it became just like work. It was work, even though I loved it, but it was still better than my work. But yeah, so
Great
I'm
story.
like, wow, yeah. But people told me when I retired, before I retired the first time from my professional career, they said, you're going to do great in retirement because you're as passionate about retiring as you were about your work.
Mhm.
So I'm still hanging on to that and saying it'll just take a little bit more time to solidify that routine or that schedule and get something a little bit more concrete in place. But I have no doubt it will come. I just need to be patient with myself more
Great.
than anything
You've got
else.
lots of
So thank you
experience.
again for that wonderful presentation. It was very enlightening, and I wish you continued good health and success.
Thank you so much, Janet. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So Riley, I had a question sent in a little bit earlier, actually,
Yep.
from someone who I'm not sure if they're attending at the moment, but I thought there was an interesting question. So one of the questions they sent was, are the 4 phases relative to age? So for example, 60s, 70s, 80s, and
Yeah.
90s and over?
Yeah. I don't think that the 4 phases are related to age in particular. My experience tells me more that they have to do with 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 aspects uh, being closely connected with retirement, because people, of course, retire at different ages, and some much earlier, some much later. So the 4 phases I see as being directly retirement connected. The 3 Ds that I mentioned, though, they're not directly retirement connected. They're more age connected. They tend to be more events of our 60s and 70s. So I draw the distinction between the two. I would say 4 phases not related to age in particular, but the 3 Ds most definitely. They're 60s and 70s.
Okay, that makes sense. And just one final question they had sent in.
Mhm.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but they had asked, are there differences in outlook or outcomes and the quality of life between male and female retirees? And
Yeah,
then they had specifically mentioned like the work at home moms of past generation and how that
yeah,
would fit into all of it. Mhm.
yeah. Well, there's really 2 questions there. With respect to male, female, my experience has been, generally speaking, that success in retirement involves making connections, having connections, being involved with others. And generally speaking, my research tells me that women are better at that than men, generally speaking. So if these are very, very broad strokes for sure, but that women often have an easier time adjusting to retirement than men do for that primary reason. Um, the second one again, remind me of that one, Alicia.
Let me pull it up. It was just regarding women who would have been working more in the home in
Right.
previous generations,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how do their retirement years compare to the national average was the question.
Sorry. What compared to the national average?
How do their retirement years compare?
Oh, I see. Well, for women who have been stay-at-home moms, they're to a large degree, they see their retirement, as it were, coinciding with the last child leaving home, kind of thing,
Mhm.
and that gives them, that extra freedom that they may not have had before. So, yeah, I try to recognize that the five unavoidable losses are really equally applicable to people who have been at home for the most part, uh, as compared to people who might have worked outside the office. There are interesting parallels. They're not entirely coincidental, but certainly there are some parallels. And as I say, for women who have been at home, it's mostly retirement for them is seen to begin when the last child leaves home.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it looks like we do have one question in the chat. So
Mhm.
Kathy asked, I have a retired friend who has no interest in serving others, but is happy to enjoy herself for the
Yep,
rest of her life.
yep,
Is
yep.
she at risk of becoming depressed?
Well, there's the Harvard study. The unhappiest retirees of all had not gone on to do anything beyond pleasing themselves. I know of only two people in all of the research that I've done who remain in phase one, and they say happily so. They're both individuals, one male, one female. One male who was involved intensively for long number of years in a large law practice. And his attitude is that he's left it all. He's left it all there. He's got nothing more to give, and he's just going to take care of himself. His favorite things are a 10 o'clock tea time and a 5 o'clock Manhattan. And that's for him, that's the ideal retirement. The lady who is a phase one person, she was an emergency room operating nurse. And she also felt that she just gave everything she had during a lengthy career, and she does not feel the need to volunteer. She doesn't feel the need to do anything except kind of pamper herself. And yet the Harvard study says that it will come back to haunt them at some point if they're not doing something that they feel is kind of moving things forward. So a very small number of people, but they say they're happy, and who am I to question that?
Yeah. And I guess it could always, they could start out thinking one thing and then realize they
Well,
would be
that's true.
happier in a different direction, right?
Yeah. Now, these are people who have both been retired for a considerable length of time. I don't see them changing significantly, but yes, that's the other thing that, I've indicated that phase one for most people lasts 1 to 2 years. Well, for some, it lasts much longer than that. And for some, it lasts about 6 weeks. And I've dealt with people at both ends of the spectrum, but generally speaking, it's 1 to 2 years. And that's certainly what it was for me, just about dead on 2 years.
Okay, that's great. So I'm just having a look if anyone else has any questions to ask. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. It is now 8:10. So thank you for staying a little bit longer. Yeah, looks like that might be it for this evening.
Okay, Alyssa, thanks for
So,
the opportunity to share my research. I appreciate
oh,
it.
thank you.
Hope it's
Thank you for
helpful to
coming,
folks.
and thank you to everyone else for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Hope, yeah, I think we all got a lot out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're looking to buy the book by chance, all proceeds go to Water Ambassadors Canada, but you can buy the book on our website, thefourphases.com.
Awesome. Okay.
Thanks, folks. Good
Thank
night,
you. I'm going
Alyssa.
to stop the recording now.